Good morning, and thank you for joining us. The webinar will begin in just a few moments. Welcome to our second leading local webinar on addressing hate crimes. My name is Manuel. I am the CEO and Executive Director of the Institute for Local Government, and I will be your moderator today. Randy K, next slide, please. So I am so excited to be with all of you today. And before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes and disclaimers. We are recording today's webinar and we'll share the recording and any related resources with all of the registrants, all of you following the webinar. All of your lines have been muted for the duration of this session, but you can ask a question at any time by typing it into the chat box on the right-hand side of your Zoom screen. Anything put in the chat box should be directed to panelists and hosts, so we will see your questions, but they will be anonymous to the other registrants, so you can feel comfortable asking whatever questions you have for us. We do have time set aside today for Q&A at the end of our session, but you can put your questions in at any time, and we'll try to take as many questions as we can in the time that we have. If you have any technical difficulties during this session, you can also feel free to use that chat function. However, we will note that we'll be actively looking for questions primarily, and our hope is that Zoom does really well today. I do know that Zoom crashed a couple times yesterday on my screen, and so I'm hopeful that we get through this session today with no glitches. My fingers are absolutely crossed. Next slide. So today's webinar is the second session in ILG's brand new Leading Local webinar series. And if you think about it, this past year has really just tested local government leaders, arguably more than any other year in recent or in modern history. Like many of you, the team at the Institute for Local Government had to make some significant adjustments to everything from our operations to our business model to respond to the changing dynamics in our state related to the pandemic, the elections, and everything else. We watched local government leaders fairly and bravely adjust to the new normal, working excessive hours and giving everything to keep their cities, their counties, and their special districts afloat. So Leading Local was really born out of the trend that we experienced in 2020. We know that local government leaders are smart, you are committed, and you are innovative. But many of you are also exhausted after an entire year of nonstop crisis response. So Leading Local really is about being helpful to local leaders and helping them understand how to continue to serve as role models for your communities and your peers in these ever-changing times. Our New Thought Leadership Forum is focused on addressing some of the difficult topics, the sensitive issues that you're facing right now. And we've identified a wide range of topics, and we're going to cover issues and challenges like leading through conflict, civility and ethics, building personal resilience, and more. And because we know that budgets are tight and time is ticking, all of our sessions will be free and specially curated with content for local elected officials and staff at California's cities, counties, and special districts. Next slide, please. Today's webinar is focused on addressing hate crimes. We're going to discuss how local government leaders can tackle complicated issues like race-based violence and hate crimes. We have an incredible panel of experts from the academic world, from local government, and from the nonprofit space. And they're all here to talk about how they are navigating the complexity of this topic. Given the recent headlines, we are focusing a lot of our discussion today on the surge in anti-Asian discrimination. But we do know that this topic goes way beyond just impacting the AAPI community. So today we're going to explore ways that local leaders can discuss this topic, discuss discrimination, and try to do more than just issue a public statement. The agenda for our webinar is really simple. We want to give a short overview of ILG for those of you that aren't familiar with our organization, and then we're going to move right into our panel discussion. And we've structured this discussion so that it's going to be free-flowing and allow time for questions throughout or at the end, depending on how it flows well. Next slide, please. In case you just joined our webinar, I just want to remind everyone that all participants will be on mute during the entire presentation. If you have any questions during this, just type those questions into the chat box at any time during the session, and we will work through behind the scenes to review those questions and determine the best time to answer them. Questions about logistics can also be dropped into those if you're having any difficulty with sound or other issues. And we do hope that all the questions that you post are private, and the intent is that they are seen by the panelists only. But as a moderator, I'll be reading as many of your questions as possible during the Q&A period of the webinar. Next slide. So before we dive into our panelist introductions, I do want to tell you a little about the Institute for Local Government. As I mentioned during the intro, my name is Erica Manuel. I am the CEO and Executive Director of the Institute for Local Government, and I've been leading ILG for about 2 years. And just like you, we're all still navigating COVID and adjusting to the twists and the turns of the past year. We do know that 2020 was one of the most difficult years for local governments in a lifetime. And what we think is good is that ILG is a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and we are here to help. We are the nonprofit training and education affiliate of 3 statewide associations representing local governments: the League of California Cities, or Cal Cities, CSAC, and the California Special Districts Association. Together with our 3 affiliates, we serve over 2,500 local agencies, and that includes cities, counties, and special districts. And our goal, our mission, is to really provide practical, easy-to-use resources so local agency leaders can effectively implement your policies on the ground. We actually love and understand local government, and that's why everything we do centers around helping local leaders navigate the complexity of their roles. And that's why we're so excited about this webinar today, and why we're excited about the series. You know, the series is focused on acknowledging the pressure of local leadership and supporting each of you during this time. Our next slide, please. We have 4 main programs of work and pillars that are targeted around leadership and governance, civics, education, and workforce, public engagement, and sustainable and resilient communities. And our mission is, again, to help local leaders like you navigate complexity, increase capacity, and build trust in your communities. And we do that by offering a range of services across all of our pillars. And that could be education and training, like this webinar, but also deep technical assistance, capacity building, convening, facilitation. And the key here is that we love to think about and talk about challenging topics, especially where it's helpful to have a neutral party in the room that understands how local government works and can speak the language of the community. We also center all our work on the principles of equity and inclusion. Next slide, please. ILG's leadership and governance work has been the foundation of our organization for a lot of years, and the resources we offer and the consulting services we provide really do help elected leaders and staff build a strong foundation of good governance, trust, accountability, responsiveness, and transparency. And it's our belief that focusing on leadership and ethics and accountability and equity is really going to help local governments like cities, counties, and special districts increase their trust with residents and in their communities. We also have a really strong pillar of work in public engagement, which is important for the conversation we're going to have today about addressing hate crimes. The work we do in public engagement is focused on helping local governments embed authentic, effective, and inclusive public engagement practices that encourage that public trust we were talking about, and confidence in institutions that sometimes have challenges with reputation when challenging conversations happen nationally and at the local level. We have a lot of free resources in both areas and offer customized consulting services to local governments too. Just visit our website to download some of our free tips or to learn more. Next slide. I would be remiss if I didn't plug a few of our exciting upcoming webinars. We're going to be hosting dozens of them this year around topics tied to those 4 main pillars of work. And in a few weeks, we're hosting our 2nd webinar on the housing crisis webinars. The date is May 6th. The topic is rental and mortgage assistance, tenant protection, and other tools. And this entire series is free with support from the Housing and Community Development Department. And we're going to talk about a variety of topics related to how you can actually tackle the evolving legislation and mandates related to housing. So I encourage you to, again, visit our website, register. It's free, and it's really going to help you get your RENA goals figured out. All right, so now no more formality. Let's get to our presenters and our panel presentation. I am so excited and humbled and honored to share this virtual stage with an all-star panel of experts this morning. You're going to learn about them through their stories and their insights, but let me just give you a primer about who everybody is. Our first panelist is Stephanie Nguyen. She is a council member in Elk Grove, and Stephanie is wearing 2 very important hats today. The first is the hat of an elected official. She is the first Asian American woman to serve on the City Council of Elk Grove in California in the greater Sacramento area. She was appointed in 2017 and then formally elected in 2018. But Stephanie's public service began well before that with her role as a committed nonprofit leader and community advocate. for more than a decade, and I've known her for 20 years, but for more than 10 of those, she's been the executive director of Asian Resources, Inc., or ARI, which is a nonprofit organization that serves and responds to the needs of the limited English and low-income communities in Sacramento. And that organization does such phenomenal work. I've worked with them for years, and it was created to address the needs of Asian newcomers and their needs with jobs assistance, English classes, youth, senior programs, health education. They do such good work. But now after almost 40 years, ARI is actually bigger than that. And they've really grown to serve a wide range of cultural and ethnic communities throughout the Sacramento region while still honoring that original mission. So Stephanie is going to be coming to us today with the unique perspective of a frontline grassroots organizer and a nonprofit leader and a city official. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. My next panelist is Nguyen Marshall. Nguyen is the executive director of APAPA, which stands for Asian Pacific Islander American Public Affairs. And APAPA is a national grassroots and community-based nonprofit that focuses on increasing API-civic participation at the local, the state, and the national level. And that's through things like voter and civic education, leadership programs, fellowships, mentorship programs. The goal here is for all of these programs to help get AAPI residents appointed to commissions, boards, and elected offices. And that's so connected to the work that we're all doing in local government. APAPA has 26 chapters across the country, and check me if I'm wrong on that, Nguyen, but all of them are committed to expanding the role of AAPI community and public service nationally and at the local level. So Nguyen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. We have over 30 chapters now.
30 chapters, oh my God, so 30 chapters. I knew that number might not be accurate, so 30 chapters across the country. Our next panelist is Supervisor Otto Lee. Supervisor Lee is the new county supervisor for District 3 in Santa Clara County, which includes North Sunnyvale, Milpitas, and parts of San Jose, so representing the Bay Area. Otto was elected to be a county supervisor in 2020, but he is not new to public service. He actually served on the Sunnyvale Planning Commission and was then elected to serve on the Sunnyvale City Council. So he did that for 8 or 9 years, from 2003 to 2011, including a term as mayor. Otto is also, though, a father, a veteran, and an immigrant, and his story is so fascinating. He's literally devoted his life to serving this community. He served for 28 years in the U.S. Navy and was even awarded a Bronze Star. And if that weren't enough, he's also a small business owner and an attorney. He's the co-founder of an intellectual property law firm in San Jose, where he has served as the lead attorney for more than 20 years. Otto's perspective is just going to be so interesting on this panel. Supervisor Lee, thank you so much for being here. All right, our next panelist is Ms. Randi Johl. Randi is currently the city clerk and legislative director for the city of Temecula, which is in Southern California, in a wonderful wine region, let me just say. And I think on a Friday, we're all a little bit thinking about that too, right? The happy hours that may happen this afternoon or this evening or this weekend. Randi brings over 20 years of experience and leadership in municipal government, and she's been serving cities and special districts throughout the state in so many different capacities. Her specialty really is like legislative platforms, elections, and community engagement. And of course, she also has a passion for equity and is serving right now as the co-chair of a newly formed League of California Cities Advancing Equity Task Force. I am also proud to say that Randi is one of ILG's esteemed board members. She's one of my favorite people. Randi, thank you so much for taking time out of your absolutely jam-packed schedule to join us today. And my last panelist, I told you this is a powerhouse panel, right? So the last panelist is actually coming from out of the government space and in from the land of academia. We are excited to share the Zoom screen with Professor Brian Levin. So Brian is the director of the Center for Hate and Extremism at Cal State San Bernardino. And it's so funny because when you think of Professor Levin's background, I'm going to give you a snapshot here, but to say that it is diverse would be an understatement. So here we go. So in the 1980s, he was an award-winning New York City police officer working in Harlem and Washington Heights in Manhattan. He's also been a corporate litigator, a legal director for the Center for the Study of Ethnic and Racial Violence, and he worked with the Southern Poverty Law Center. He's worked with CSU San Bernardino since 1999, and in that time, he's just become one of the most prominent experts on hate and extremism worldwide. You might have seen him on television. You might have heard him on the radio. You've definitely seen his byline in news articles. He is absolutely world-renowned as it relates to his experience in this space, and he's often interviewed in the media and giving presentations in Washington, D.C. for the UN, for FBI, and many, many others. So we are so excited to have Professor Levin with us today to talk about this important topic And that rounds out our panel. So thank you all, and let us move into our discussion. And everyone, if you could virtually clap, I know that you are. Thank you for helping me welcome today's panelists. So Randi, if you wouldn't mind dropping our slide deck and stopping the screen share, we'll dive right in. Perfect. All right, so today's conversation, you can actually stop the share altogether. Wonderful. We wanted to see everybody in a little larger frame. Today's conversation is about addressing hate crimes and the way that local government leaders, staff, and policymakers can tackle such a difficult topic. And as a disclaimer, I want to give you guys from the onset that this is a subject matter that we've discussed that is both sensitive and it's weighty. And there is a lot to this, and we're only going to be able to scratch the surface today. Because of current events, I think we are centering much of our conversation today on discrimination and violence against the AAPI community. But as you all well know, hate crimes can affect a wide range of victims of all races, religions, genders, abilities, identities, and sexual orientations. And so we're going to touch on these topics in our discussion today, though it's going to be focused primarily on the AAPI community. I do want to acknowledge and center that this is a much bigger issue than what we can cover in just an hour. And the reason we're focusing on the AAPI community today is no surprise to some of you, but it's because between March 2020 and February 2021, the group Stop AAPI Hate reported more than 3,800 anti-Asian hate incidents in the United States. A survey from the Pew Research Center said 3 in 10 Asian Americans reported having been subjected to racist slurs or jokes since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic just last year. Studies have shown that former President Donald Trump's description of COVID-19 as the Chinese virus led to a rise in anti-Asian hate online. And then this year, very recently, we watched in horror after reading the news about a series of shootings in Atlanta that left 8 people dead, most of them women of Asian descent. So the man arrested in that particular incident told police that race was not his motivation in the shooting, but the attack sparked really international dialogue on the increase in hate crimes and incidents against Asian American Pacific Islander individuals. And then just last week, a suburb of Indianapolis experienced another tragedy where 8 people, including 4 Sikh Americans, were killed in a shooting at a FedEx facility, which hit really close to home for a lot of people. And now the Sikh community is also in mourning and calling for that unity and support, which is so justly deserved. So in response to this, this is a rise in publicity of these incidents. Hundreds of businesses and politicians and celebrities are finally speaking out, and organizations from diverse communities across the United States are calling for action and change. We do know that President Biden has issued presidential memos, and this is not new information, though. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot larger and longer genealogy of anti-Asian violence, and many of you are saying that this is just the beginning, right? We're just learning about things that have been happening for a very long time. So let's dive into our questions. We've set the stage, but I want us to maybe start to move forward by looking back. And my first question is for Professor Levin. I'm going to ask you if you can ground us in some history. Before we talk about the current events, could you please explore the history of some of the hate crimes in this country? What are some of the relevant background that we should consider as we begin to explore this?
Well, it would take 350 years, so I'll have to truncate it a bit. Let's start with 1990, and I'll tell you why. Because that was when the Hate Crime Statistics Act was passed. So how do you, when we have had slavery, when we've had race riots in the teens and 20s, Klan-led, when we had thousands of lynchings, you have to cut a demarcation point, because otherwise you're out of context and minimizing things to a point that would strain credulity. So let's start like everything else in recent times, because in the age of the internet, there is no history. But what I thought was so interesting is if you look at 1992, that was really the first year that we had usable national data, but we also had data from cities that have been keeping data for about 10 years longer. 92 was an election year, saw an increase. 96, that was a time when we saw another peak. The 90s were bad, okay? You had skinheads murdering people across, Nazi skinheads murdering police officers, murdering others across the country. There was a Justice Department task force on it, Oklahoma City bombing. And you also had the traditional hate groups, interestingly enough, which are floundering other than kind of a vessel for certain types of ideology that's still out there, leaderless resistance and white supremacy, and it gets intertwined with a modern bent. But what we're having now is something different. So during that time, the Klan was kind of falling out, and you had the Nazification and the militarization of hate groups, and they spread nationally, and they hooked up into things that were involved with mainstream politics. But even President Reagan, who launched his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, when the Klan endorsed him, rejected it root and branch. Now we're not seeing that. Stand back and stand by. And what happens online, I mean, we can measure this stuff. And there are various ways that we've done it. And I'm thrilled to be criticized by the National Review every time I do it, because every time they do that, 11 months later, the FBI comes out with data like they did in 2015, showing that we were right down to the decimal. So thank you again for calling me a tendacious researcher. But I'll go with the California state system, which awarded our research the best scholarship in the system rather than their ridiculous criticism. But that's the world we live in. Facts don't matter. So what we had is 95, 96, we saw an increase. What were we seeing around that time? The internet starting with hate groups entering online in the spring of 95, 2001, bad. And then we had an interesting thing, kind of this relative plateau that then went down and bottomed over the 30 approximate years that we have hate crime data in 2014. But since then, it's gone up, it's become more violent. And what we've seen, this terrible carousel for a year or two or more, where Latinos, then Muslims, Sikhs, Jews, Asians get carouseled out as the legitimate target for aggression in political discourse and online, and then it's reflected in our data. It's also around catalytic events, but here's the thing. People are asking me this question. We just have data now. First quarter, horrible, but horrible in a way that it seems to be, at least where we're getting the good data from, certain places on the coast. Doesn't mean that we don't have it elsewhere, but the best data that's showing the biggest increases are in places like New York, LA, San Francisco, Boston, and DC. And different cities act at different times. But bottom line is, we're seeing a historic surge in anti-Asian hate crime. It is a terrible thing, and it's violent, and it's happening routinely. This is a historic surge, and the public has the right to know the data when it comes out. The problem is, I have had to rush like the plate spinner on the Sullivan Show just to press all the jurisdictions for this data. And what I would say in closing is, for those of you in government, start with policies, your police department, data, and coordinating both inter-group, but also intra-agency, and do it routinely. Those are the several things that I would say this historic surge in anti-Asian hate crimes is teaching us. Also, to the AAPI community, got to close with this. Thank you for partnering with us. I love you guys. And these groups are doing such an incredible job. We are going to be donating a small amount of our scholarship win over to Stop AAPI Hate. Cal State San Francisco doing a wonderful job. Include your academics who are doing great research. These folks who are doing the great research, they are the ones who have to be part of this along with the community groups. And one last thing, support AB 1126, which would have a permanent independent state of hate commission. We need to pay attention to this. We just had the the COVID-19 hate crime bill passed. The Arab American Institute, academics, the leadership conference, and the AAPI community mobilized and got this done. This is going to be an important development for the country. Keep your eyes open and reach out to those stakeholders in the Asian American community who are in government, who are in law enforcement, who are in advocacy groups and in academia, and make them a permanent part of this coordinated effort. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And to the AAPI community, I love you. We stand with you. We are gonna fight this until this scourge ends. And we're working 7 days a week on it, and we're your partners.
Wonderful. Thank you, Professor Levin. So that was an amazing kickoff, right? So in addition to having allies on this line, there are solutions that I think Professor Levin identified too. But one of the things he said was that this is a historic surge, right? This is something he's seeing with the numbers that are showing that over time, it's worse now than it's ever been for this community. And,
Could I just say
one of the things I like to do.
Can I just say one quick thing?
Yeah.
Listen to this. Listen to this. There's a lot of baloney out there in punditry and elsewhere. And this is academics. And these are Russell Young up at SF State. This guy's a genius. We have him on our board. Okay? We are seeing, for instance, the Stop AAPI hate numbers dovetailing with what we're showing. New York City, okay? New York City, first quarter, a record. 42 anti-Asian hate crimes that we know of. We have many more that are unreported. That is more than the probable record year that we had in 2020. San Francisco, first quarter of 2021, we have more than all of 2020, which was a terrible surge year. What more does government need to make this response more immediate and stand with our brothers and sisters in the AAPI community on this? This is a historic surge, and we have to do this at not only the federal level, but at the local level as well. That's why I am so thrilled with you, Erica, for putting this together, because this is a point where the local communities matter, and the expertise that we have in these local communities with these advocacy groups and academics and others is so critical to being part of this team. Sorry about the interruption, but I owe these wonderful community advocates and academics, particularly in the AAPI community, so much gratitude for what they've done to get this passed. And I want you, there's not a day that goes by where we're not interfacing with someone in some part of the country on this. So thank you so much to those stakeholders who have done such an incredible job, and now off to the House to get the COVID bill passed. 94-1, 94-1.
Nicely done. Thank you, Professor. I would agree. You know, I think we're talking today about how do we make this happen at the local level? How do we, take advantage of the groundswell of support? We've raised awareness of the issue in many, many circles. But I want to step us back for just a second, because I want to know a little bit more about our panelists. I want to understand that your experiences, as Professor Levin mentioned, we're so committed to being allies in this effort and really thinking about how this impacts people personally. The data is important, but what's the personal impact and what's the personal experience and what is your passion around these? And I'd love for some of our other panelists to talk a little bit about what has this meant to you? The numbers tell us that there has been a surge, but what has that meant to you personally and professionally? If you would just briefly tell us a little bit about your experience with this and your story, and then we'll talk about what we're doing. So more about you personally. And maybe we'll start with Councilmember Nguyen. Stephanie.
Great, thank you, Erica. Thanks for pulling us together, and I'm really humbled to be sharing this platform with all of you. And you can now see why Professor Levin is the person that the media goes to all the time for everything, right? So I appreciate everything Professor Levin has said. He has set the ground for us. Data doesn't exist unless the community reports it, right? Unless it's being reported. And that was the problem, is that the Asian community, the Asian American Pacific Islander community, didn't have a safe space that we felt we can report. Being an elected official, I understood that, right? Being a daughter of refugees that came here in 1975, my family experienced anti-Asian violence, anti-Asian hate, but we never knew what that was. We just thought this is what America was about, and that they were upset at us because of the Vietnam War. Coming here, thousands of refugees, we looked different, we spoke a different language, we ate different food, and we dressed differently. So of course we were gonna get made fun of course we were gonna get attacked. This has been happening since my parents have been here in 1975. This has been going on ever since we've stepped foot here in the United States. What I'm proud to see is that more of us are speaking out. more of us are reporting it, which is why we have the data. But let's be real, and let's say that I know, and I think you all know, that the data is not a true reflection of what continues to happen every day. And I say that because we held a press conference here, and literally 2 days after that, I had letters being sent to our office about how they were a victim of an anti-Asian violence right down the street from our office here, and that they were so afraid to come out and so afraid to report it because of the fear of retaliation, the fear that it wouldn't be kept confidential, and the fear that nothing is just going to happen. So why report it? Why report it, right? And so my organization here has served the limited English-speaking, low-income immigrants and refugees for the last over 40 years. And so when we talk about anti-Asian hate, when we talk about anti-Asian violence, that's what I live every day. I live it every day because not only am I hearing it from the individuals that come into our office and share their stories with us, but I know it exists. It happened to me as I was a young child. I saw my family go through it. And now I get to be that voice for my community, for my family, for my city as well, to tell everybody that this exists. I can't tell you how many people, how many friends, close friends, called me and checked in on me and said, I never knew this happened, right? And shame on me, they never knew because I never said anything, right? They never knew because our community never shared it. And so now it's out there. Now more and more people know. Now we need to continue and educate the community. We need to continue and educate our elected officials. We need to continue to educate and find an area and a way in which we can unite and work together. I love that Professor Levin kept saying he loves the Asian community, the AAPI community. He's there, he's working 7 days a week. I wish more people would say that, right? Because an attack on one community is an attack on all of us. And the AAPI community has been there, has marched with all of the other communities as well too. Now it's happening to us, and we're asking you to stand with us, to march with us, to speak with us, to speak out with us as well too. I'm going to stop there because I want to give my other panelists an opportunity to speak as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Supervisor Lee, would you like to tell us a little bit about what you've experienced?
Yes, thank you, Erica. And just like Stephanie said, you know, hate against one is really hate against all. And this is such an important message because as much as this is now the chapter, and I've said to people, you know, the hate issue against the Asian American is nothing new. Some have said this and I'll repeat it, which is, it is a new chapter of a very old book, right? I mean, if you want to go back 1881, back then there was lynching of Chinese Americans in Los Angeles. Like I think at least 70 people were lynched, and the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, whatever, lasted till 1943, right? And even though that was gotten rid of course, that was 1942 is when we interned all these Japanese Americans after Pearl Harbor. And so these type of hate issues has lasted far too long. And again, this is just almost like a variation of the same theme that we're seeing it again in a different way. And of course, coming from the last occupant of the White House, his mouth about these names of the viruses certainly has stoked it. And some people said, why is it now? He's been out of office for a few months now, right? Well, I said, well, maybe partly because we were actually told to stay home, right? For all those months, we're supposed not to go outside. So with less interaction, it probably didn't happen at the time, maybe only a grocery store because we shop. But now from this year on, we really see the numbers to be mounting much greater in intensity. Early on is more like, just a dirty look, or maybe some type of words. Now we're seeing the physical violence, right? So we're really seeing this increasing. And I can tell you, I mean, my mother-in-law has been living in this country for 50 years. And she told me, it's like, I don't feel safe taking the bus. And I said, oh, are you afraid of catching COVID? She says, no, I'm afraid of being beat up. Right, so you could see that this is really happening with our community in so many ways, and I think the ability to build that trust, to build that safe space, like Stephanie's talking about, is so important. Because why bother reporting if nobody takes us seriously, right? AA is you might have a language barrier. If you find a translator, take a report, forget it, right? That type of issue, and I think that's why it's so important that we need to make sure that this idea of this model minority, we're quiet, obedient, no longer. We've got to speak up. It's got to speak up. And then the other thing is working with our community, our law enforcement, is that we need a police officer. We need our DAs to understand that hate crime is not something that they could just one of the other charges. This is a serious charge. And the fact that whether it's hate incident, hate crime, that's not for us to decide, right? This is what the DA does. But it's important for us to make sure we make that report. And I think it's so important that this is not only a matter of just speaking up. Another thing I want to mention about this, the bystanders, right? We're now encouraging doing bystander training, because some of the victims we've spoken with, of course they are disgusted with the perpetrator, but sometimes they are even more disappointed that people around them, whether it's grocery store, wherever they're at, when these things are happening, people are not saying anything. Right, and that is so important to make sure that people realize this is not acceptable. Silence is not right, and so I think these are all the messages that we're now giving out to our community and through schools, through education, and I hope that the word gets out there, like Professor Brian Levin was talking about. Right, this is about speaking up and just getting a message out there to basically like enough is enough, and this is absolutely not acceptable.
And thank you so much for that experience. Nguyen and Randi, tell us about your world. What has this meant to you? How has this affected you?
Hi. Well, as an immigrant who risked my life to escape communism to be here for all the freedom that this country has to offer, just like Stephanie, I appreciate what I gained. So I've made it my own mission to really give back whenever I have a chance as I become more successful in life. As I'm doing that, I've learned a lot more about the U.S. history and our history of systemic racism. And while it's disappointing, it has not hurt me as much as it's been in the last year, seeing this recent surge as a result of the pandemic. So I personally feel very lucky that I have had managing a national organization that serves and try to empower the Asian Pacific Islanders. We do it through education, we do it through leadership and civic engagement. So we never really thought that our concentration would become to talk about racism and trying to because with 30 chapters across the nation, all our leaders, our members have experienced this surge. And I personally was, either listening or trying to intervene or trying to help so that our voice can be heard. And being located in Sacramento, we are very close to the Bay Area. And as you all know, the surge on all the attacks against especially the very vulnerable population, which is our elderly, has been, broadcasted all over the world with, all the incidents. So it's become a personal thing now for our organization. And I'm so happy to see the coalition that's being formed, that, everyone is speaking out now. And, language barrier is the main thing. And so that's what we are trying to make sure that the voice of, those who cannot speak for themselves, we can be there to be, the advocate and make it so that everyone is on board, knowing how serious of a problem it is, and together we need to really eradicate it with the support of, not just the ATI, but all together, because racism should not be in this such an advanced country like ours.
Absolutely. And I do know that just yesterday, a large cohort of over 100 national organizations came out speaking out, another initiative that, to your point, brings a lot of communities together, showing that there is support and allyship across cultural lines, across geographic lines. And I think that is a step in the right direction. Thank you for that, Nguyen. Randi, would you like to close us out with your experience? And Randi Johl has a really interesting background, in part because she's also on this panel, the only local government staffer on the line. So I'm really excited for her to bring that perspective to this as well.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. First and foremost, I want to thank you. I want to thank the ILG team for even creating this space to acknowledge our shared struggle, to have dialogue, to progress in solidarity. We need more of these spaces to make sure that we are hearing and seeing those that are on the front lines of this struggle and those that are working in the rapid response space. And I definitely want to acknowledge all 8 victims of last week's attack in Indiana. I think when you posed the question about how has this impacted you personally and professionally, I would say last week when I saw the name of Amarjeet Johl on the screen, it hit home, right? Because it's my last name. And in our community, we're all 3 degrees of separation, not 6. As Councilmember Nguyen referenced, you know, I'm first generation, born and raised here, but my family has been here since the early to mid 1900s. And we thought when we were in Central Valley and we were going to school, that it was in elementary school, it was normal to have our braid pulled or told to go back to your country or any of these things, because we looked different, we dressed different, we ate differently, whatever it may be. And I think over time, as you grow, you start to understand that it's not normal, it's not okay. And I think for our community and the larger Asian community, there is some intersectionality between anti-race hate and anti-religious hate. And that was at the forefront of post 9/11, when less than 4 days later, we had our first anti-Sikh death with Balbir Singh Sodhi in Mesa, Arizona. The other piece of this is it's really important to recognize, I know you described us as experts, and I wholeheartedly see my fellow panelists as experts. I don't know that I see myself as an expert. I see myself as someone with a lived experience and acknowledge that others may have different lived experiences. But those working with the Sikh Coalition, those working with the Sikh American, Sikh American Legal Defense Fund, those working with CARE, in the anti-Sikh, anti-Muslim rapid response space, those are our heroes, right? They're the ones that are getting the call. And our responsibility as personal and professional individuals that share an identity is now to speak up. We have been taught in the local government space to not talk about race inside City Hall or county buildings, not talk about religion, not talk about the things that have happened to us outside of these buildings. And it is so, so important to be courageous and be brave and encourage our fellow coworkers, our community members to report. Help with the statistics, please. That is so important. So for me, as somebody, we just locally as a staffer, a couple of months ago, we created our new READY Commission in our community, our Race, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Commission. We are learning, we are putting ourselves in that space. We have courageous community members who are serving in that capacity. We have elected officials who dared to create this commission, and we have community that is encouraging this effort. It's not to say it's easy, it's to say that we no longer have a choice to fall under the model myth minority umbrella and remain silent. So that's what I would share.
Thank you. That is an amazing background and an amazing kind of recap of kind of how you got here. And I do appreciate that what I'm hearing from everyone is that this is not new, but that this has been almost a silent crisis. And it's been some time that you have been kind of experiencing this in different ways, in different places, but with the same general thread, which is that you have just thought that this was part of the narrative. This was part of what you were supposed to experience by being here. And this whole model minority conversation, it's so telling because it's not fair. And it's not okay. And the more that we speak out about it, the more we normalize the conversation about reality, and we figure out how to solve it. Randi, one of the things you started to talk about is actually one of the things I'd like our panelists to talk about next, and it's this. You know, our conversation today is about action. It's about making strides toward making real change at the local level. And you have brought up, all of you, something that you thought was really, really important. Number one, we've heard speak up and speak out and take complaints seriously. But there's a lot of other things that all of you are doing in your communities as well. And I'd love to hear, particularly from our local government officials, what are your communities doing? Randi gave you a little bit about what's happening in Temecula. Supervisor Lee and Councilmember Nguyen, what have your communities done from a local government-led level? What are you seeing that's working and or maybe just starting in your community?
Sure. So just like you said about the acceptance issue that you just mentioned, right? Because if you remember, how many people have come up to say, oh, can't you just take a joke, right? That whole thing. And let's face it, Jay Leno 2 months ago came out and apologized for making all those jokes that he has made in the decades against Asians and how wrong it is. And I'm just telling you those jokes are not acceptable. So I just want to make that comment following that point. Now, as far as the local responses, certainly various of our local communities have all adopted resolutions to denounce these hate crimes. So for Santa Clara County, right here, which represents close to 2 million people, from Palo Alto to Gilroy, the whole Silicon Valley being here, we passed a resolution against hate crimes and creating the Hate Crimes Task Force back in December 2020, seeing this coming. And this wasn't really so much on AAPI hate crimes, it's just hate crimes in general. That's why this was started. Then in early March, we saw that the AAPI hate crimes coming through. So I specifically put the resolution through with one of my colleagues against AAPI hate crimes. And that very next day, Tuesday, we passed it. The very next day, Wednesday morning, 6:30 a.m. was when a Filipina woman got attacked at our Caltrain station, at the Dearborn station in San Jose. Was this guy yelling these nasty things I can't say here? And so we realized, you know what, passing resolutions is great, but look what happens. It doesn't get far enough. So we really need actions. So the next meeting, we actually put through another referral to talk about anti-racism, community outreach, and an actual education campaign and what activities that we can do to fight this head on these crimes and violence. And what we have done is basically ask our county staff to come back with different proposals and funding requests on what is needed in order to make sure that our public safety, our DA's office are working together to make sure that we might have additional patrols and Asian businesses, for example, so that people can feel better out there shopping, right? Like I said about my mother-in-law's experience on buses and things like that, to make sure people feel safe riding public transportation. And one thing we also did was in April, we have approved another $10,000 for resources to purchase these safety alarms and lanyards and wristbands to be given out to AAPI elders or just elders in general who feel unsafe. In the old days we used whistles, right? But now, of course, we've got these safety alarms, and those are things that we want people to feel safe. Not that they all will have to use it. Hopefully, they don't have to use it. But the fact that they have it, I hope to give them the extra sense of security that they should be able to go out there and enjoy life as all of us are. Because if we live a life based on fear, then they win, right? And so we're looking at the May 4th referral I mentioned that will be coming back from the county staff, and I'm really excited to see that some of these real active proposals will come through. And of course, there's also various federal and state legislative proposals that's being put through as well. As you mentioned, the 94.1 vote on the Senate was very amazing. And Professor Brian, you know what? Only about, was it a year ago? That same type of legislation was proposed by Councilwoman Ming and then passed. I mean, could you believe? I mean, it was ridiculous that even back then. So you really could see that the tide is turning. The tide is turning, but there's so much more work we need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Otto. Stephanie, can you talk to us about what Elk Grove is doing? As I know you have some exciting partnerships as well.
Yeah, they do. I could talk a little bit about what Elk Grove and also Sacramento is doing as well. So in addition to, very similar to Supervisor Lee, in a resolution, all of the cities within our region are passing these resolutions, which is really great. I saw in the chat somebody was asking for an example, and we'd be more than happy to send you a variety of examples in all the cities that have done it. In the Sacramento region, right here on Stockton Boulevard in the city in Little Saigon area, where a majority of your immigrant Vietnamese AAPI community reside, what we've started is a Safety on the Boulevard, Safety on Stockton Boulevard, which really is having community members. You've read about this, very similar to what they're doing in the city of Oakland, but community members just being around the boulevard and being visible and walking people from the door of the supermarket to their cars, or from the cars to the doors if they don't feel safe, but also just being that extra eye and ears for public safety as well too. This is a partnership with our local law enforcement that is happening. Our mayor introduced a buddy program where it's working directly with a nonprofit organization. They can call in to the local law enforcement department to a helpline. The helpline connects them to a nonprofit organization that would then connect them to several other nonprofit organizations that can assist these community members if they need to get to an appointment, if they need an assistance, or walking with them to do the just typical grocery shopping or whatnot. We are also holding several listening sessions, several vigils that are happening in our community as well too, an opportunity for community members to come out, to hear, to listen, and also understand. Talked about some helplines in addition to the helpline at the police departments or our local law enforcement agencies. Many of them are working directly with community-based centers because they understand that our community have a distrust in local law enforcement and government. And so what they've done is they've directly worked with the local nonprofit organization who has this captured audience where they've already coming to us for several different services and resources, and we have that trust, right? And so they're coming directly to us and giving them that opportunity to be able to report these crimes to us, feeling more confident that nothing will happen to them, and also understanding that we're there to help them in addition to reporting, but also the wraparound services that we're able to connect them with. The other thing that we're doing here at ARI is that we're starting a victim assistance fund or reward fund, and this is to encourage them to do several things. One is encourage people to speak out. Many of these crimes, somebody has got to see it, somebody knows who did it, but they're not reporting it. And we're hoping that this will encourage folks to report these incidents. But also letting folks know that if you are a victim of a hate crime or anti-Asian violence, that we have funds to be able to assist you, whether it's medical bills, whether it's you've lost some time from work because of the fact that you had to stay home. We want to be there to assist you throughout this whole entire process. And that would be working directly with the police department. So a couple of things, you know, you've got a couple of groups that will say that, why are you working with the police department? They are the enemy, right? What I said earlier is that this is about unity. This is about working together, and we have to find ways and areas in which we can work together, right? And this is one area in which I felt like we can work with the police department in helping us. And this will also teach them, as Supervisor Lee talked about, is like hate crime incidents. We need to make this real. We need to make sure that they know that this is a hate crime incident. We're going to continue to push it until you call it a hate crime incident, an anti-Asian violence incident, right? Because let's be real, many of them don't understand and they don't know it yet. But until we continue to push it, maybe they will finally see it.
That's a really good point. And I want to go to Professor Levin on this one, because I feel like there is this delay, right, between an action that we believe and we see and we think maybe a hate crime, and then you transition and it takes a while to actually have it designated as such and to have it taken seriously as such. Professor Levin, do you have any experience in that and sort of how that pipeline works, right? And how do we really continue to encourage reporting and then also taking these things very seriously?
Great question. And there's a tension between how police are trained to follow legal thresholds. You have to have probable cause that a crime took place and probable cause that it was motivated in significant part. And there's some legislation on that, but we'll skip that for now. But there's a legal threshold. So here's a simple answer. Suspected hate crime, possible hate crime. We're investigating it. New York City, I did an over a decade study of theirs a long time ago. They were the second city to start counting hate crime in the United States in 1981. And they reclassified about 9.5%. Also, a lot of departments are not doing a good job. Alabama reported 0 hate crimes. We were talking about the tragedy in Atlanta. There was only 1 reported hate crime to the FBI in 2019. See what I'm saying? So we need to see more reports. But for those larger police departments, I think, we're now seeing a very mixed, very interesting, a mixed motive type of extremist offender too, where they're picking and choosing from a buffet of grievances, and it may not be possible, but I'll tell you something. FBI has a list of criteria, and among those is, were most of the people targeted from a certain group? Was it in a particular location? How does the community feel? Once that threshold is reached, which is not a legal one, but it's a communal one, right? You say, look, we are examining all aspects, including the fact that whatever this is a possible hate crime at this point. The legal standard is X, Y, and Z. But if it's going to be a sheriff who's selling xenophobic shirts, I don't think that's the fellow to do it. And I would have in each department, even a small one, a bias liaison officer, and you spoke out. When I say spoke, I mean like bicycle spoke. You have a bias liaison officer. They meet regularly with the community. They meet regularly with public works. What if someone paints a swastika? Well, you want to make sure that you take a photograph of it first before it's painted over. Coordination and outreach, particularly to the Asian American community now. Why? Because there are so many languages, cultural barriers. We've heard about it. So I have so many cities that I'm looking at now. Look at this, 0, right? And then I have cities that are showing huge spikes. What it's telling us, and the research shows it, is that there is tremendous victim underreporting. And while most recently, the majority of hate crime victims do actually report, according just by a bare minimum, the immigrant and Asian American community is not. And one last quick thing, recognize things have changed. 1996, 42% of all hate crimes were directed against African Americans. They're still the #1 group, unfortunately. Well, it's unfortunate anyone's the #1 group, right? But 26% in 2019. So we're seeing this carouseling out, and that's why we need to listen to the community and have these folks are the stars. They're the ones that making it happen in the community. I hate the celebritization garbage with regard to hate crime. Plant our stuff where we're at. And that's why have it routinized, have a definition, have a model policy, have a liaison, and also have mutual aid across agencies, but also across advocacy groups as well. And I just want to just say one thing. I love every one of you. The efforts that were done at the grassroots level, we've had this research for years. I've been doing this for a long time, back when the Reagan administration was saying clip newspaper articles. But it was the fact that we were able to coordinate the Arab American Institute, the Stop AAPI community, the Sikh Foundation, all these folks, we all worked together. And then it was just a beautiful, it's almost like watching an athletic event, because we knew we had an opportunity. Why? Because we had this historic surge. So we have to make this routinized, and that's why I think we not only need what's being done at the local level, we need a state commission, AB 1126, so we don't have to beg state authorities who sometimes get rotated out to other government positions. So routinize it and make sure at the level when it happens, you don't discount anything, and you reach out to the community and you say, look, we're aware of what the community feels. We have some investigating to do, but we are looking this as a possible hate crime. Boom.
Wonderful. So it sounds like, you have to take these things seriously. We have to create the structure within our law enforcement agencies to make sure that it's possible. There are other things, though, it sounds like we're hearing from this group, and what I've seen in action is that it takes partnership from the local governments, the law enforcement, the community organizations, the statewide organizations, and everything in between, including allies from other cultural organizations and others, to really raise the visibility on this and really think about how we can work in a unified manner to address some of these issues. One of the things I want to talk to Nguyen about is, there is an interesting dynamic between law enforcement, and the AAPI community, but then also around elected service and the AAPI community. And I'm curious to know about your role in bringing on people, getting them more engaged civically, having them be in leadership roles in elected office. What is your perspective on this and the value of having models like Supervisor Lee and Councilmember Nguyen and even Randi Johl in these spaces? What is the importance of that visibility and of their role?
You know, with our organization, we understand the importance of a coordination, you know, between the local elected official and the, you know, at the grassroots level, how we can work together to move policies and to make changes and to impact. I mean, basically protecting the lives of, you know, of the residents that live locally. So local government leaders are absolutely very critical in, you know, protecting our residents. And but you can start out by listening to the hate crime victims and assailants here, right? And then you want to ensure that safety is very, very important. I'm going to give you an example. Our San Francisco chapter, they have a very close working relationship with the police department there, because you need to be able to report crime and you want to be able to have very prompt service when you reach out to them. And then with the local mayor as well, so that, you know, that local mayor, you know, London Breed is very in tune with the needs of our of the residents that are vulnerable, that are subject to these attacks. So as a result, you know, they came up with a hotline that are enable Chinese speakers to call in and report incidents so that something can be done about it, so that consequences, you know, need to take place for those who committed crime. So that's just one example. Another example I want to share is that one of our members, her name is Lisa Yep Salinas. I hope she doesn't mind that I'm sharing her name here. But she was a six-time racist attack survivor, and, you know, since the beginning of the COVID-19. So instead of just being silent, you know, that's including, I'm sure you've heard about, you know, a Costco confrontation that, you know, she was involved in. But she basically was attacked, and she's a grandma, and then she fought back. But instead of being silent, she worked with us. She worked with, in fact, she was like leading our efforts in working with various city elected officials and even school board, because kids in school are being bullied now just because of the way they look Asian, right? So they've been targeted. So she worked with, you know, through her effort, you know, in Yolo County region, she worked with, I think, 4 city council and board of education, public school district, a bunch of, you know, variety of organizations. And then she was able to help pass the president, you know, the President Biden, you know, on January 26th this year, the resolution, you know, combating the xenophobia to support the AAPI who are victims of hate crime. So this inspired more and more cities to be, you know, on board and helping. So that's how you make changes. That's how you can impact, and that's how you can really make this stop. I mean, make this hurt stop, make this pain stop, and then people who are even thinking about attempting, you know, they will be fearful of it now, because they know now there's a coalition behind, you know, this effort. So they are not going to be able to get away with it.
There is strength in numbers, right? As they say, there's strength in seeing that there are people behind you, that there is a force behind you, and that you have support. I love that story, and I think Lisa Salinas would appreciate you flagging that, and Yolo County's done some fantastic work. There is a question in the chat about resolutions. At the end of our sort of panel discussion, I'm going to show you at least a link of a number of resolutions, toolkits, and some other activities, things you can look at, campaigns, and other resources for those of you that are watching and listening, for you to link to you to see as examples for how you might bring this to your own communities. Those things are incredibly important first steps. Some of the other things that you all have talked about are other steps, things that are more actionable, things that are more on the ground. But let's talk about the teeth that are needed, right? That it sounds like some of you are doing not only the resolution piece, you've gone beyond that and you've thought about what are some other things. I love Supervisor Lee's example of providing funding so that you can have some kind of alarm, right? Physical alarm to protect people, make them feel both physically and emotionally safe. What are some of the other things that the Asian and API community needs now? I mean, the piece of paper is important, but what do they need? What kind of support do they need? Is it physical safety, do you think is the biggest concern? Is it emotional support to encourage the reporting? What are some of the things that would really be more than just a token effort here? I'd love to hear from anyone about what you've seen that's working or what you're hearing that the need really is.
Erica, last night, I want to share with this group because this very question was a big part of the Solidarity Vigil last night that occurred 1 week after the shooting last week. And that event, a 2-hour online event, was multiracial, interfaith, included, testimony, storytelling, and it was a gathering in solidarity of every color, creed, gender, race, religion, to lift each other up in this moment of trauma for one segment. And in that shared solidarity, there was so much hope in that. And that came across in the speakers and in the testimony as well, was, hey, look, we stand with each other in grief, trauma. We understand that what hurts one of us hurts all of us. And we're not going to leave your side. That reassurance of 1 week later, we're not going to leave your side. 2 weeks later, we're not going to leave your side. 1 year down the road, this is not going to be another webinar that occurred in 2021, right? Like this is something that is different. And I think a multitude of actions, a multitude of action plans. I know cities and counties and special districts are doing race equity plans. They're doing all kinds of different action plans. But everyone has a responsibility to use their platform for anything at this point, to stand with each other. I'll take anything other than silence at this point. And I do want to mention one kind of follow-up with respect to the esteemed elected officials on this screen. When they have the will and the courage to bring forward on behalf of their community actionable items, I will say, from a staff perspective, for those of us who have been silent for many years, if we demonstrate, hey, give us the work, we're willing to do the work, give us the policy, you want to help the community in some way, we will implement your direction in this really important space. I think that connectivity is also really important.
Wonderful, thank you.
And I'll chime in just a bit too. I agree with everything Randi said. In the city of Elk Grove, we have an amazing staff. We also have a diversity, equity, inclusion commission, and they do amazing work. And even at the staff level, they exactly like what you said. What can we do? How do we do this? We're going to do it. We set aside some funding for this as well too. We constantly have consultants coming into assist us with this. I just want to touch up a little bit about law enforcement. So it's so important that we also have a diverse set of individuals that work for the department as well too. So 20 years ago, they probably all looked like Professor Brian Levin at the department, right? And now it's so important because of what we're experiencing now that you make sure that the officers and the deputies reflect the community as well. Not only does it help for individuals like my family, when they see somebody that looks like them, understands them, and can relate to them, it makes them feel more comfortable to share even more, right? Especially when you can speak the language. And so we're watching as some cities, not all, some cities across the nation starting to understand that and starting to buy into that and starting to make sure that they have a diverse workforce. We've worked directly with our local law enforcement organizations here in the region to ensure that they have access to those. In the Asian community, nobody wants their kids to go into law enforcement. That's probably the one thing that they want, is for your son or daughter to go out there risking your life, right, every single day. And so it's gotten better, but it's understanding that these young people, if this is what you thrive and what you want to do as an organization here, we're here to help you, help your parents understand the importance why you should be in there if that's what you want. But it's also educating the law enforcement organizations and agencies how important and how beneficial it can be for the department and also for their city as well too. You know, as Asian Americans, and I think Nguyen and Supervisor and Randi will agree with this, we don't ask for anything, right? I get that all the time. You guys never come and ask for anything. You don't, you know, you put your head down, you do your work, the whole model minority, right? We don't ask for anything. As somebody who's running a local nonprofit organization here that is doing this stuff that you see every day, funders need to understand that I don't come to you for anything, but yet right now I'm fighting this battle. I'm fighting this battle all across the nation with all of my brothers and sisters. So you need to fund organizations that do this work every day so that we can continue to do the work, right? So that we can continue to educate our community. You know, support our businesses as well too. We don't ever say that. Most Asian businesses, especially if they're immigrant owned, you don't see them on Yelp. You don't see them sending out coupons. You don't see, what you see is the mom, the dad, the son, the daughter after getting out of school coming in to help out, right? And staying until late at night. The pandemic crushed us. So before people even stayed home because of the pandemic, before people even stopped going out to eat and these restaurants shut down, people stopped coming to our restaurants. People stopped shopping at our supermarkets. People stopped giving us the business. And now we're asking you to come back. We're asking to support these businesses so that we can continue to raise our family, so that we can continue to have an income and be able to live and whatnot. And so, you know, I think we're not asking for much. We're asking for you to speak out. We're asking that if you see a grandma getting her purse yanked or getting her head kicked or getting beat up, stop what you're doing and help her, right? Don't just look. These things are happening during the day, my God, and nobody's doing anything. They're shutting their doors. That needs to stop. That needs to stop. I carry a bat in my car now because if I see something like that happen, I told my police chief, I'm swinging.
I love it. I absolutely love it.
Just be careful when you ask her for directions.
This is true. This is true.
More with what Stephanie shared there, I think it's important to do all that to help. And then I would have another ask from the local government leaders and the official is that come out to the community, get to know us and know our culture and celebrate with us our culture, so that you can have better understanding, better empathy, and understand our behavior, which will result in so much less unintentional bias and whole slews of issues as well. So that's one thing that I would ask our elected officials to do, and then for us to come together, work together, present issues together, and then solve have solutions that is gathered as it's a result of a collective ideas and effort. It's not, like Stephanie, I think someone mentioned it, if you attack one of us, you attack all of us. So we need to have that mentality in order to have the strength to fight back this, which, by the way, I would like to plug an event that is a national event, which I hope that everyone is going to be joining us. There is going to be a national rally on May 15th. Where we are inviting all, not just ATI now, all Americans, regardless of affiliation, community, race, ethnicity, or whatever, just come out and speak up. It's on May 15th at one single time across the nation. It's 2 p.m. for Eastern time and then 11 a.m. for Pacific time. So more information can be found on communityagainst.hate.org. Currently, we have over 30 organizations nationwide already signed up on it. So come out and join us and show that we all care. Thank
I
you.
love that. And
Yeah.
what we will do is when we do our follow-up information to all of the registrants, of which there are hundreds, we will make sure that they all get access to that link and that they can also sign up to participate in that national event. And really just to put a fine point on what you said, it's about the solidarity. It's about acknowledging that we are all in this together, that there is, when you hurt one of us, you hurt all of us. And I think it's an important conversation to have with other ethnic and cultural organizations, religious organizations, and other affinities, because, you know, this isn't an isolated incident. Professor Levin, you know, mentioned that, you know, at some points in history, it's been African Americans. At some points in history, you know, the spokes have changed and it's different communities, but someone is targeted. And I think that there is power in those numbers of saying, you as a community, we are rallying behind whoever needs the support at that time. And so in terms of actionable steps, I want to make sure that we focus on to-dos, right? The resolution is phenomenal. Do the resolution. It speaks volumes to your intention. It speaks volumes to your expectations. And it says, hey, this is what our community believes. There will be examples of resolutions that you can look at that we will share with the panel, that the panelists have, but then also that we'll share with the registrants. It's also about having task forces. You all have some kind of task force. It's a combination of staff and maybe others from the community, nonprofit organizations, law enforcement, really thinking about what is the problem in our community and how can we address it. Make sure that the solutions have community input and maybe even are community driven. So I'm hearing that too. The other thing that I'm hearing is that it's important to not have this be the crisis of the day, to make sure that this is not just right now, it's not just what we're hearing and seeing today, but that we're thinking about as a long-term systemic thing that we need to consider forever as something to keep an eye out and look out for. Professor Levin, anything else that you're seeing nationally maybe that you can give us that maybe gives an example of some other things, actionable steps that these local government leaders can take when they just don't know where to start?
Yeah, you know, I would look for other resources. Human relations commissions, and if you don't have one, you can make one. And there's a wonderful organization called CAIRO, California Association of Human Relations Organizations. They'll help you if you can get some funding, because this really is locally, right? We're looking local. The feds, they can help with things like data collection training, but at the local level. First, let's not make it a law enforcement centric thing. Yeah, we need modeled policies. Yes, we need reporting of hate crimes, but we also need reporting of hate incidents. And sometimes human relations commissions can help coordinate this kind of stuff. Orange County does it that way. Bottom line is, there is power in what you are seeing here. And what I mean is that we now have such wonderful engagement with respect to the AAPI community, the Sikh community, the Arab American community. We heard about 9/11. We had more hate crimes against Arabs that were racial than we did anti-Muslim, and we have to understand the intersection of this. Don't make it law enforcement centric. Sure, do you want to have these folks in as part of the routinized systematic creation of new structures? But remember, it's a combination of structures, actions, and policies, and keeping that continuing along with the spokes. The outreach, you need those two things. You need the outreach, you need the expertise. And when I mean expertise, I don't mean getting necessarily the professors, although I would love that if you would, but I mean the people who are experts from the lived experiences and the coordinations that they have in this community. One last thing on this, Reverend Vivian, who passed away last year, I got to talk to him on several occasions, and I represented his group in the first thing I did as a lawyer before the Supreme Court. And he used to say to me, "We've been waiting for you." That's what he'd be saying to young people and local people. This is not something where there are figureheads. It's everybody rolling up the sleeves. And I want to tell you, if there's anyone in local government here in California, or anyone in the Muslim, Arab, Latino, immigrant, AAP, you name it, community, we have to work together. And what we saw at a national level, we saw that kind of home run get hit, and a bunch of us who were on base get to celebrate. We need to do that now at the state and regional level. And it's really important to keep this kind of momentum going. And I just want to say from the bottom of my heart to everyone who's on this panel, you are the heroes. You are the heroes. And I just want to thank you so much for what you're doing in your community. Don't be shout, be loud, and be proud, because what you're doing in your communities, you know what we find? Someone in a community 100 miles away will say, hey, that's a great idea. It's not coming from just the Ivy Towers, but we do want to have everyone involved. And thank you so much to the wonderful stakeholders here who are making the difference at the community level. That's where it starts and that's where it ends.
I love that. Thank you. You're so right. And I have one more question, and then I want to take us to the wrap up, because I know I could talk about this forever. This is such a phenomenal panel. But there's a question we've got, and we've been taking questions throughout this session, if you hadn't noticed, and thank you to those of you that have been putting them in the chat. You know, we've gotten a question about how do you start to change the mentality of your communities around these topics, right? We know this, we're talking about how we've seen it and heard it, experienced it over the course of many years, and it's just a real fine point now that it's being elevated and really talked about. But the community at large that's not part of the AAPI community may not know this, may have different experiences. Certainly these task forces are a phenomenal start. Diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging to conversations are really important places to start. Conversations about equity in your community are important places to start. Sharing about how your cultures are connected and what opportunities there are to engage. Also a way to create empathy and awareness of how vibrant and amazing Asian cultures are. Are there any other things that you have seen work well as it relates to kind of helping people change their perspective of the Asian community? And maybe we'll just take one comment if any of you have any examples of things that have worked really well, just to address that comment about how do we start to have the conversation, because it's a really difficult one to start having, and how do we begin that?
And of course, it's all about education, right? At the end of the day, it is about getting this information to people. Stereotype a lot of times is just, lazy way of learning something. You just figure, hey, that's the stereotype of this person. It's so easy to break those barriers. And at one of the rallies I went to, I remember this sign I really like to see is, it says, "Love us as much as you like our food." And it's so easy. But say, oh, well, I love Chinese, I love your food. Well, good. If you love our food, that's great. But please love us as well, right? Please come to our restaurants. And we need the business, and we are in this together. And I think it's something that is so important. And I kept saying, when you look at some of the environmental movement, so many young people coming out to talk about the world, the global warming and climate change. And I'm now seeing that same energy in the young people coming out with the racial justice issues. So in the Black Lives Matter movement, a year ago I was marching along with many of my African Americans. But it's not just, the best part is when Black Lives Matter started, it was much more African-American centric at first. But when you saw the march last year after George Floyd, that changed. Everybody came out. And I think it's so important that this is the same type of movement we're doing for the so-called AAPI hate. It really is everybody coming out. And I'm just so honored to say, I see Muslim American, Jewish American, Black, Latinx, all at these marches. And I know that this is really a tipping point on this issue. So I'm honored to say that I could see this momentum. Getting the kids involved is so important, because sometimes by teaching the kids, they bring it back to the family, to the kids, to the uncles. And those, side comments at the Thanksgiving dinner is no longer acceptable. And we need to make sure that people understand that. Yeah.
I love that. And that actually leads me into our closing comment for all of our panelists, just in the spirit of thinking optimistically and thinking about the opportunity that we have right now. This is a challenging time, and we have to keep moving and we have to keep improving. What do you see that gives you hope? What opportunities do you see that exist? What, in the short, just a couple seconds, tell us what you're excited about based on the conversations we're having today, the things that are happening right now, as hard as they are. What's the silver lining here? What do you all see that you can leave our attendees with today?
I'll make it quick. More and more people are starting to see it and understand it and recognize it and are wanting to have this conversation. And I wasn't sure if that was going to happen, right? More and more communities that are not from the Asian American Pacific Islander communities are starting to say, I want to have this conversation. I want to talk to you about this. Answer some questions for me. And I love that because that means they care and that means they want to know. It's the ones that don't know and don't ask and aren't saying anything are the ones that I worry about. And so the silver lining, if you're talking about that, Erica, is that more and more communities are starting to come forward. There are more and more of these panels. I do one every single week. Professor Levin probably does one every day, right? And so, but that's a good thing. That means that folks want to know, and the fact that we have a good list of attendees that are sitting in, listening, and stayed from the beginning to the end, that gives me hope that people care. People care, and they want to do something, and they want to know how they can help.
Wonderful.
For what Stephanie said there, because conversation like this, thanks to you, Erica, conversation like this helps tremendously. I mean, last night I was on a Zoom meeting talking about the very same thing with a completely different group, headed by CIFAC leaders, prominent leaders within the community. But, primarily there are a lot of, leaders of color, of different ethnic groups. And so the more people understand and educated and know about the culture and the needs and the reason behind certain behavior, because we have to say that, yeah, we do have a systemic racism in this country, but it has to start, at the grassroots level where education starts from there. Students, as they are in school, they need to have ethnic studies. They need to learn that there are more than just their own culture out there. And in order for us to be successful, we need to get to know each other and work together and celebrate our cultures rather than, staying away from it. So I think that is huge, as the very basic step of fighting this whole racism
Absolutely.
thing that becomes so ingrained in our mind these days.
The opportunity to teach young people, the opportunity to teach the next generation so that we don't have to have these conversations every year for the next decade or more, right? This is a chance for us to really make some change. Any other panelists want to talk about what they think is their, the silver lining on all of this, and even though it's a tough topic to begin?
Yeah, Erica, it's interesting because in our community, there's this concept of Jardi Kala, right? And Jardi Kala is eternal optimism, right? So while we come together to grieve and, share in our trauma, we know that there is this eternal optimism for better. And not better for just one segment, but better for all segments of all of humanity, right? So I am encouraged, as Stephanie was mentioning and Nguyen was mentioning, more and more folks from externally from API are standing up with us in solidarity. I am also encouraged by our Asian brothers and sisters who are breaking through this model myth minority and speaking up for the very first time and being brave and courageous to say, no, I'm gonna speak up and use my story, my voice as well. So that for me gives me eternal optimism too, that there's this internal collective voice that is now coming out externally.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, I don't want to cut anyone off, but I do want to acknowledge that we are at time. And I just want to say that this has been an absolutely amazing panel. We could literally talk for another 3 hours about this, and we only just hit the tip of the iceberg on some of the issues and the opportunities that we have, the solutions that we could come up with. But I think if we're to put it into a nice little bow, I think that there is an entire national, global community standing and rallying behind the Asian community right now, understanding in a way we never have before that this is a huge issue and that we all deserve to stand behind you and support you as allies, not to be passive bystanders when we see things, and to really talk about how communities can work together to find these solutions. And for those local elected officials that are on the line and those that are in government wondering whether you have a place or role in this, the answer is yes, you do. These are examples of people that have done that and that are excited to show you maybe how to. We are going to show you some resources in just a second that you can leverage and to utilize as models, whether it's for a resolution, whether it's for a task force. We're going to try and get you the toolkits and the talking points that you need to be able to have these tough conversations. And one of the things I saw that I loved is communities that don't even have a high population of Asian residents are still coming out with resolutions saying, we support you. And so it is about standing together and standing strong as a community, a global community, and one that includes all races, all genders, all religions, and everything in between. So I'm going to ask Randi K behind the scenes to put up our next slide, just so that we can tell you the resources I was talking about, and then talk to you about our next webinar. Excellent. So we have had a wonderful, wonderful discussion. And one of the things we wanted to make sure is that you had some helpful resources on this topic, toolkits and campaigns on the left, resolutions and statements you can look at on the right, and there are many, many more. I will also, when we send an email to all the registrants, we'll include an attachment that is a variation of this presentation and any other resources our panelists want to share with you. And again, we want you to have what you need to implement well on the ground, and we are going to make sure that we do that. Next slide, please. We plan to have about 8 to 10 more leading local sessions covering a range of topics, and we're going to hear from authors, from academics, from local government experts. And really the thing is leadership, governance, equity, ethics. We're covering all of it. Anything tough to talk about, we're going to do it, and we're going to do it in a way that feels meaningful and thoughtful. Please stay connected with us to learn more about the next session. Next slide, please. This is how you stay connected. We hope that you will. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, website, newsletter. These are all the ways that we communicate with those around the state, 2,500 local agencies, 20,000 elected officials, staff, and others. And we really want to make sure you are informed. And again, hundreds of you registered for this webinar, knowing how important this topic is. You will get access to the links, the recordings, and the panelist insights. And then the next slide, that recording should be available soon. And we're going to make sure that you get it as soon as it's available. And we're very happy that you have been able to join us today. So the next slide just says thank you. This concludes our webinar. We want to thank you so much for your time today, those of you that attended as attendees, and certainly panelists. Thank you so much for your perspectives, so much for your insights. It's been a really wonderful discussion. I wish I could keep having on this Friday. But on behalf of the entire team at the Institute for Local Government, please have a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you, Erica. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.